You too. All right, thanks everyone for coming. We got an interesting session here. It's really nice to see it when it goes from theory to practice. And so I've been with Zerto long enough. I'm Shannon Snowden, Senior Technical Architect with Zerto. I've been with Zerto long enough, about 5 years, to live through the different evolutions. So one of the evolutions was when we added AWS support about a year ago. And now seeing it in practice is really interesting. So what we thought we would do in this session is have a couple of our customers, Andy Wolf and Jamie Williams, talk about their experiences. So if you haven't gotten there yet, learn from people who are living it, using the product, seeing the features, functionality, and also we just had a conversation over there talking about adding things that wasn't possibilities just a little bit ago. So in case you get lost, that's Jamie, that's Andy, so that's Jamie and that's Andy. I'm Shannon, so. And I can try the laser pointer. That's Jamie and that's Andy. So. All right, so we're going to follow the same format. So each will do a presentation on who they are, what their company is, a little bit of background, and then we'll talk about their company, an overview of what they've done architecturally in the environment so far, and then their journey with Zerto, and then why did they pick Azure for Tinkata, but they also picked AWS. So, and then with Moritz, as far as AWS goes, so we're going to talk about both and pros and cons and where they fit in, because both do fit in. There's certainly room for everyone when you're going ubiquitous to the cloud. And then some key takeaways. What are the proof points that it does change the organization substantially? So with that, here's Jamie. Jamie, take it away.
All right, sir. Thank you very much. I'm Jamie. I am a Senior Systems Engineer at Tinkata. We are a global textiles-based company. Our corporate headquarters is actually in Nijverdal in Holland, but if you can't tell by the accent, I'm from Atlanta. Our shared service center is in Peak 10 in Atlanta, physical right now. We used to have 2, and now we're down to 1, and I'm going to share that journey with you and how we evacuated that one and plan to evacuate the second one shortly. Around 5,000 employees. Here's our revenues in euro if you want to convert. So our environment, we are a VMware shop. We have 99.9% virtual environment, all the way down to load balancers. We have not implemented anything such as NSX because it didn't solve any problem that we have right now. Too expensive, and we thought it was a problem looking for a solution, honestly. So we do not have NSX when people have asked. We did have Metro E between data centers. Again, UCS, Cisco, VMware shop. So your classic, what everybody came from, what we're all used to. Nothing special about that environment. Same old, same old. We were replicating between those 2 sites, and you can see then the data, just 32 VMs, 8.3 terabytes of data. And the way we determined that, some people have asked me, I've been walking around, is we tiered our applications. So that number came from self-discovery when someone said, what's the cloud? And we said, I have no idea what you're talking about. The first thing we had to do was look inward and say, what do we have? Is it worthy of moving to the cloud? Will it work in the cloud? And then when we said, what do we have? We honestly did not know, because Tinkata is a acquisition company. They would go acquire somebody. We would go to site. We would upgrade their infrastructure on the network side to get them up to par. We would P2V any virtual they have, put an ESX server on-prem, move it to the ESX server, use Zerto to migrate it to our data center. So that happened pretty rapidly. So we were acquiring a lot, maybe had a spreadsheet of inventory, but really had no, we couldn't connect the dots and say, these are the stacks that comprise these applications. Cloud and the introduction of Zerto, of course, as we probably all know, forces that. I had to create a VPG, so I had to start figuring out what talks to what. That helped me go down the path of, what am I going to move to the cloud? Now I know what I've got. What is capable of running in the cloud and what is not even an option? So So I start making the divisions on that based on this information. So some of the systems we have right now, again, I am using AWS. AWS was first. We went to AWS first because Zerto supported it first. Went to Azure second because Zerto supported that second. That's how we made our decision straight up. I called Zerto and said, what do you recommend? And they said, in about 3 weeks, we're going to release this, and you'll be able to replicate to AWS. It's like, okay, we'll go to AWS. So my choice was based on what Zerto supported. So I knew I could call them. I knew I had support from them to say, I'm having issues, I'm having problems. So I have some ERP systems, file servers. We implement anything net new now, Server 2016. We're running crystal reports, business objects, industrial automations. That's all the old blade servers that were running the manufacturing machinery on the floor. We P2V'd, put on ESX. So any systems that we're running, ITE Siemens, any of those things that are running industrial automation, producing products at a plant are all running in VMware. All of those are being protected. We tier those tier 1, so that's a Zerto protected application. Those go back to peak 10 right now. We have a Citrix farm that I am trying very, very hard to get rid of. SharePoint SQL. SharePoint environment, Exchange environment, Link, Skype environment, we all run hybrid with Office 365. So my Exchange hybrid endpoints are actually running in AWS in hybrid mode with Office 365. We have challenges with bandwidth, specifically in Canada. So we were working with Rogers and TELUS, and they gave us 3 meg and thought that was as good as you could do in the Great White North. We found some providers that would like fiber up there, so we've since increased that. So now they're at 10 megs. That was a very big challenge also in California when we first brought on a company moving an ERP system of about 300, 400 gigs over the wire from California to Atlanta. Was undoable. We didn't have Zerto at the time. We tried to use VMware's replication appliance. It failed miserably. After about 4 weeks, I gave up because it just said check. I didn't know if it was replicating or if it had stopped, or I didn't know what it was doing. So that was 3 weeks of wasted life. Zerto, we knocked it out in a weekend, even with 3 megs, informing the user that you will see an impact and when can I throttle it and when can I give it full access to your network. It worked great. Traditional hub and spoke. So everybody here is probably used to this. 2 physical data centers, multitude of locations. These are manufacturing facilities, sales offices from Ontario, Ohio. I'm trying to think of all the locations. California, spread geographically all about. So at that point in time, we had 2 physical data centers that we actually never had a primary and a backup, so they were both hot. We were running instances out of each of them because we were struggling with resources at that time. Then comes along Zerto with replication to AWS. I jumped on that because of the resource constraints. So working with the Dutch, you literally put in the monies you want in about 2 years in advance. So the first year you're going to be denied. It's just the way it works. You're like, I need sand. You start begging, usually 3 years in advance of when you're actually going to run out of disk. So at about the 3-year mark, we beg for money. They say no. 2nd year mark, they say, give us a business use case. We provide them a business use case. The 3rd year, we get the money, which works out in our advantage because in 3 years, storage technology has evolved so much, we're able to get 2 to 4 times the amount of storage with the same amount of money that we asked for 3 years past. Now, that money is all being shifted toward cloud services. So we started replicating to AWS to alleviate those types of things. I can't get any more money. I mean, Holland has point blank told me no more capital. We're going OpEx. You've got the last bit of hardware you're going to get. So what I have is what I have. UCS chassis, V7000 SANs, that's it. I'm not getting anything unless I pay for it, so we're not getting anything. Then comes 5.0 with replication to Azure. I had VPGs already set up going to AWS. When I did the test to Azure, The RTO is uncomparable. I can't explain to you the difference between AWS failover and Azure. Granted, AWS failover is improved 6 times. So my first test with AWS, this is right after beta, was around 12 hours for around 300 gigs. Now I'm down to, say, 45 minutes. But still, when I ask a business, do you want 10 minutes or do you want 45 minutes? They're more willing to cough up the money for the 10 minutes to go to Azure. So we do charge back to the opcos our costs, a fraction of our costs, not total our costs. So we ask them, what are you willing? How long can you be without this data? And of course, everyone's answer is never. Okay, it's going to cost you $75,000 to be never. So then they reevaluate and they come back with the real number. And that's how we decided how we're going to subdivide AWS and Azure. All right, so I already covered this by mistake. So we're all in hybrid mode because that was the easiest. The Dutch also wanted to know where my data is. My email, I want to be able to capture and control. So we purposely set up Exchange in hybrid mode so that all email comes in and out of on-prem. I've never done anything with that data, but if we wanted to, we could. So we still have, again, like I said, 2 EC2 instances running in AWS, Oregon set up for our hybrid for Exchange. Hybrid SharePoint is actually running out of Atlanta. So we do have some all-in SharePoint sites. We have a hybrid SharePoint site because we have a document repository that requires some things that must be on-prem that I cannot do in Azure. Once we get rid of that product, we'll be all in. Hybrid Link is running out of Enschede in Holland. That will be decommissioned before the year is out. And in 3 years, all of these will be, or 2 years, all of these will be decommissioned. And we're also using CRM out of Azure. And all of those are add-ons to O365. So once we move to O365, that just opens the door to, for $3 more, you can do this. For $2 more, you can do that. And once you get into that realm, you get in contact with your rep and start getting some better numbers. You start getting some better prices and things. Because they'll see you're consuming these services and they'll want to encourage you to continue to consume those services, but more fiscally responsible. So they'll help you with that. ERP applications. Our ERP application is something no one in here has probably ever heard of unless you're from Canada. And it's called Jomar. Nobody? Well below anything you've ever heard of. It's a specific to textile production, very customized. They do customizations every quarter. It's not something you can go to Walmart and buy. It's not something you can get a SaaS model for. We do have support for it, but it's not an easy application for us to do anything with. We totally depend on the Canadians to help us with this. So if it went down, it would still come down on my head saying we can't get into the ERP system. So what personally can I do besides call Canada and tell all the plant managers I called the Canadians? Is not an adequate answer. So if I have Zerto and I can replicate this out to cloud provider, even on-prem to on-prem, I at least can cover my butt. I can bring the thing back up and I can have the application running. Call the Canadians and say, what do I do now? It's running, this failed, fix it. So that's why we cover especially that, because it's not J.D. Edwards, not anything anybody's ever heard of that doesn't work for Tincada. So the end user licensing. Did anybody ever use, back in Office 95, all of that stuff, you could pay $10 and the corporate user could take a CD home and install Office. They really liked that. That went away. And particular people really got angry. I think what it lent itself to was early adoption. If I can give this Office CD to my end users, they take it home, they use it, they get familiar with it. My service desk calls goes down, they learn how to implement it at home on their own. They're more familiar with it. They're comfortable with it. So it was a good thing. With O365, they just bumped it up to 10 installs. When we first went in, you could do 5 installs. I think they bumped it to 10 installs because they realized that most people only install 2. You do it at work and you do it on one computer at home. So if I give you 10 installs instead of 5, I look like a superhero because I know you're only going to consume 2. So who cares? Licensing, if you've ever gone through a Microsoft licensing audit, with O365, you cannot over-provision. So as far as Office CALs, things like that, it's not a problem anymore. I've had the thrill and enjoyment of going through 2 Microsoft licensing audits since 365. I pay, they show up on the portal, I assign them, I cannot over-provision. All I've got to worry about now, server, SQL, I'm getting rid of Exchange, so I don't have to worry about that. Much easier to control your licensing and know what you owe. You don't have to go through 3-4 weeks of what do I have to be in compliance. You don't have to say, I'll just cut you a check for you to go away. That makes it a whole lot easier. So once we start moving up to the cloud, DBAs, things like that start to take over. And we want to transition to getting rid of the instances and start consuming paths. I want the service. I don't want to worry about patching. I don't want to worry about upgrading. I don't want to worry about 2018 when it comes out. So we start dismantling the services and trying to find out what can we utilize in the cloud to take the place of this. SQL is the first thing that came to mind. So right now I've got a DBA who's really proactive. He likes to learn. So he's messing with this, but this is our end goal. We want to use Zerto to forklift up to Azure, disassemble the application stacks, and start consuming these as a service rather than running bulk VMs in the cloud. Last reason seems obvious. We went to Azure because Zerto supported it. So some of the benefits and savings. The RTO to Azure, as I said before, I was usually getting under 16 seconds site to site from data center to data center. I'm getting about 20 seconds. I'm not using Direct Connect. I do not have any with AWS or Azure, so we're talking VPN, a little over 8 terabytes, and I do throttle it during the day because some manufacturing facilities did see an impact when trying to get to the ERP systems, but that's inherent to the application. You can go in and throttle it and take care of that. You see no more service tickets coming in asking why is something slow. And that's where we set our threshold to. So I do get a little bit of bitmap syncing during the day, but it's expected. I know what's going on, but I'm still protected, and I'm making the user happy, and I'm keeping myself safe. No more hardware refreshes. That's a big one for me, probably for everybody in here who's ever had to go through that big, long Excel spreadsheet and figure out what have I got, how much do I owe, how much do they say I owe, what's the maintenance on this stuff. A really bad one for me was a firmware upgrade on a SAN. We had to do firmware upgrades down to the disks itself. That affected the MTU, and our storage went offline for about 6 hours until we had Cisco and all 3 vendors on the phone to say, check jumbo frames. Like, oh, okay. I don't know why a disk firmware upgrade would affect jumbo frames, but we were down for 6 hours, literally because of that. I don't worry about it anymore. It's not in my hardware. Expansion at the click of a button. So in the cloud, just like when we first started using VMware, they want you to consume as much as, I would say humanly possible, I guess as much as fiscally possible. So it's real easy to consume resources, and it's meant to be that way. It's enticing. They want you to consume it. That's their business model. I like consuming it. My boss doesn't. Innovation. There's something new because there's so much competition in public cloud now. Competition between even public and private. So the private is still trying to say, come to us because we're near and dear, you know us, don't go public. So there's competition amongst all of them. And that's driving all of these innovations. When I first started using AWS, there was a page of services. You go to AWS and Azure now, and you can literally scroll through the main page of available services every day. You think they've got thousands of people looking for ways that we can consume a service from them. We've got teams on-prem trying to keep a business running. They've got teams just innovating, just sitting there trying to figure out ways, how can we provide a service to fit and fix a business need. And it's amazing. You think about how it's evolved in our lifetimes. And right here, while we're talking, someone's thinking of something to make available to us in the public cloud to consume to fix a problem. I can't do that. Price and competition between cloud providers, again, if we can play those. if I can have sometime in the future Zerto telling me a roundabout cost, if I take this workload and I move it to Azure, it's going to cost X. If I move it to AWS, it's going to cost Y. On the fly, roundabout, I can start playing these costs off of the public cloud providers. So we can start pitting them against each other to get more fiscally, down in the range and more acceptable to the business. Access to expansive support. Again, if you can pay for support for your cloud providers, you've got the people on the line that built the product. It's kind of like coming to ZertoCon and talking to the engineers over there. You can talk to the people who built and came up with Exchange. You can talk to the people who developed and worked on SharePoint as opposed to Googling, going and buying that 8-inch thick book of essentials. You can throw all that stuff away and communicate with the people whose job it is to support, build, maintain these operating systems and these services for us. Monitoring alerts. My counterparts in Europe, they have SCOM. We do not, but as part of Azure, I get OMS. So in Azure, I can, of course, communicate across to AWS. I can communicate on-prem. I can communicate to all those sites that we saw on that hub and spoke. So I'm using OMS in Azure to monitor AWS, my data center in Atlanta, as well as my remote sites. With Server 2016, you can go to portal.azure.com and run PowerShell remotely from Azure Portal against any 2016 server that you can reach on the network. And that's pretty darn powerful. If it's in AWS, I don't care. It's just a site. It's another data center. It's another location. If it's 2016, those tools are inherent to the OS. I believe you can install those tools in 2012 R2, but 2016 gives that to you out of the box. Key takeaways. I would say, unlike your favorite sports team, don't pick a favorite cloud provider and put blinders on and say, this is the one and only truth. Go to the business, ask them what their pain points are, find a service from a provider that fits that pain point and resolves it, and use that service. There's no need for us to put blinders on and say, AWS is the holy grail, it's always, they've got the answer for everything. Azure is the holy grail. We can consume services across the board. It doesn't matter who from, as long as it fits the need of the business and resolves the problem. I led into the next one, look for solutions. So if you find it in AWS or in Azure, look for a competitor. Compare the cost of each of them. What about the cost of implementation? How difficult is it going to be to implement it the Azure way versus the AWS way? What's it going to cost me in time and pain? Can I get it up quicker if I go with this service provider rather than that service provider? So things like that most of the people, they don't consider. They're just looking at the P&L and how much it's going to cost. But what about our time? I don't want to be there at 10 o'clock at night. I don't want to be the guy that had to be there Christmas Eve and Easter because that's the only time that you're allowed to touch these systems. So what about my time, and how can I pick a service that I can implement and users may not even realize it's going on? Like hybrid environments. We implemented hybrid environments. Users don't have a clue what's going on. Pick the service, I wouldn't say necessarily that's convenient, but it is more friendly to the end user, more friendly to us as a user community to implement and to maintain. Come to ZertoCon. Engage with your peers. Go to Ignite. Go to reInvent. Ignite's going to be in Orlando. It's going to be a blast. Where else can you learn stuff directly from people who've utilized and put this stuff into practice that's not going to just try and sell you something, but tell you honest experience, except if you come to these events and learn from us. So if we share information, it's much better than going to a YouTube video and seeing a marketing slide. And you'll notice from Zerto, most of the sessions from Zerto aren't salespeople. They're real life people who've used the product and come up here and sharing how we've used the product. And I think that does a lot for the product itself. Free trials. Contact your Microsoft rep. They're always giving out free credits to move into Azure. If you get a really nice Microsoft rep, you can go back to them 3 or 4 times and get some credits. One key takeaway from that too is if your bucket of credits runs dry, so does your services. So you don't get a window of opportunity to refill your credit bucket. So the instant you consume your last credit, no longer can you ping your services, no longer can you reach them till you give them some money. I understand that, but just be warned, I didn't keep a keen eye on my bucket of credit, and I ran the well dry. And monitoring started going red, started getting texts and emails, and I couldn't get to Azure. Apparently you have to pay for it. Ask your Microsoft rep for free credits. I think that is the in the mind. One other really neat story that I'd like to tell you. Look for ways to use the services outside the means in which they were implemented or built for. I remember this keenly because it was election day. We had an ESX server purple screen in California. We were, of course, in Atlanta. We installed ESX on a USB drive and run it, root it from there. What we ended up doing is copying an ISO from VMware out to an S3 bucket, using ILO on the HP to connect to the S3 bucket as a virtual drive, and installed ESX from an S3 bucket in Oregon to an ESX server in California, and got the thing back up and running. So look for ways that you can take advantage of these things that the implementers didn't even think existed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jamie. Let me run through a couple slides here, and then we'll have questions for either Jamie or myself. You probably already read this about merits. Science and art of people and potential. We help people and companies help their employees perform their best through customer experience, loyalty programs, motivation programs, incentive programs, meetings, and incentives. Voted St. Louis best place to work. About 4,000 employees globally and $1 billion revenue last year. Our challenge was that we have multiple business units that each have multiple RPO and RTO requirements. We also have a co-op model, so the business units can decide what technology they want to go with. If it makes sense to share it, either fiscally or from a responsibility perspective across business units, great. If it doesn't, kind of one-offs. Our DR strategy, well, let me go down to the bottom left here first. Hosting strategy. We have self-managed data centers, 2 regions, one in Missouri, one in Ohio. We have a public cloud footprint. Excuse me.
Sorry. Had to go.
Public cloud footprint, some in AWS, that's mostly infrastructure as a service. Some in Azure, that's mostly platform as a service, taking advantage of some of the things that Jamie mentioned. We're running over 100 VMware hosts and about 1,600 VMware guests. We've got a couple of Solaris boxes for financial applications, which tie into our DR strategy I'll talk about a little later. Top right, DR strategy. We're using Zerto to protect 74 servers from VMware on-prem up to AWS. And then we've got another about 100 servers that we're not using Zerto yet for various reasons. Some because we've got big iron or heavy metal, whatever you want to call it. Others because we've got large sets of data that we don't have bandwidth for yet. Our journey with Zerto, how Zerto transformed our company really is it took the talk about DR from a painful cost-oriented discussion to a DR as a strategy discussion. Really quite remarkable. When one of the VPs realized that we could take our DR approach to AWS, not only solve our DR problem, but also prove whether the company's cloud strategy roadmap for 2 years down the road would work. Look, we can solve DR and we can prove that we can run this load in AWS at the same time. Great. So it really took the DR conversation and put it more of a strategic conversation rather than a post-op conversation. Why AWS? When we started, Zerto was one of the few products that could get us to the cloud. Mainly, we were looking at it because we were asked to do more, recover more systems at lower cost with no CapEx. The VP didn't want to sink money into a 3-year hosting solution that he might not be able to get out of if we move to the cloud. Okay, so let's look at the public cloud to start with. Hosting flexibility, timing. We have kind of a strange scenario where we would need 15-minute RPO, so we can only lose 15 minutes of data, but we can take 3 days to get it up. A little bit of a strange business. We're not in healthcare or banking. Okay, technical reason. Public cloud would greatly reduce our DR standby costs. Zerto could replicate to it. We tried another product. Bad news, couldn't do anything over 30 gig VMs. I thought my career was down the drain. Zerto came to the rescue. Zerto costs and savings. Some numbers for you. Initial implementation of our first DR project saved 20% over 3 years. Not only that, but it gives us the flexibility of not having those sunk costs. We can go year by year and change our DR approach as our strategy changed for on-prem. Successful recovery of that first business unit prompted another business unit to come on board, saving 90% of previous DR costs. Your mileage may vary, right? Results not typical. Results are probably more typical of the first one. But in the second case, we hadn't done a DR estimate for this business unit in 7 or 8 years when we were running physical servers. And it was so high that they never wanted to look at DR again until we had a successful DR for the first business unit. And then they said, let's try it. And sure enough, we pulled it off for 25 grand instead of 250. Once again, your mileage may vary. Do your own estimations. I've got a spreadsheet if it'll help. From a technical perspective, Zerto helped us address several challenges. First was the timing of our files on servers had to match the recovery point of the databases. Now, if you're DBAs, you know you can restore Oracle, SQL, et cetera, up to a point in time using transaction logs. Before, our servers were all across the map. We're using VMDK backups or whatever. We might get one 15 minutes, we might get an hour later. Zerto allows us to pick that point in time, recover everything up to that point in time within seconds of each other. That means our files are in sync, our data is in sync. It's a great solution for that. Configuration management, we don't have Puppet, Chef, et cetera yet. So this allows us to take a copy of prod, restore it with confidence that it's going to match. If you're using Zerto for migration, you already know that. Another great use for it. Key takeaways, where does it fit best? Our business model allows the business unit to decide. Some are in Azure, some are in AWS, VMware to VMware. Zerto gives us the flexibility to use one tool that our engineers are comfortable with, go to multiple places. Ask the question, where does it fit best? Kind of like Jamie said. A few gotchas for AWS. It works great. You might want to take some notes if you're thinking about AWS. By default, AWS limits us to 5 imports at a time. So when you click failover test or offsite clone or whatever it is, you can only do 5 at a time. Not very good when you're trying to spin up as many as you can, as quickly as you can. You can request an increase up to 20. Now that's still not 64 servers that we're recovering, but it's better than nothing. The import, kind of like what Jamie said, the import is not 0 RTO yet. I hear there might be some things coming in tomorrow's keynote session that will help this, so I'm pretty excited about that. But it takes 24 to 28 hours for a 600 gig server. Our smallest servers running about 100 gig will come up in an hour and a half. So if you've got a really tight RTO, you might want to consider Zerto for Azure, where the numbers are lower, or maybe we'll wait until tomorrow and see what comes out of the product roadmap, right? We'll see. You also want to be careful. Zerto, if their secondary IPs assigned to an instance, you've got to assign them to AWS, or AWS won't know about them. If you're an AWS engineer, you already know that. Change the EC2 instances. There's some limits on the type of server you can import into. So if you look at import OVA or import image documentation in AWS, there's some limits about what your destination size can be. So we're importing a server that requires 64 gig. Okay, well, AWS might not support importing to a 64 gig server right off the bat. So we import to a smaller server, then we change the EC2 instance size afterwards through AWS CLI. Also, Zerto has a cloud appliance that runs all the time. Reserve those in AWS for lower cost year over year. What's next for Zerto at Merits? We're going to continue to expand this DR approach to the remaining BUs as they have interest. And the successful test with Zerto means they have interest. We're looking at Azure, potentially lower our RTO. I might wait until after tomorrow before I decide to try that. But the business is, even though a 3-day RTO is acceptable, one of the VPs said, well, it'd be really nice to have our reporting up in 2 hours. Can't quite do that. Our timing and the size of their servers means we could get it up in 6 hours, not quite 2 hours. Still better than nothing. So to keep that in mind. And then finally, we're going to consider protecting our SQL servers and Oracle through Zerto. I know it's supported. There's some people who do it. I haven't tried it yet. That's next on our list. So that's the journey for Merit. I'm going to invite Jamie back up and Shannon back up and take some questions from you all. Or Shannon, you have some closing thoughts?
Yeah, so thank you guys for sharing that with us. I had one question that I wanted to make sure that we hit. So the name of this session was Proof, How Public Cloud Transformed Two Companies. So Andy, how would you say it's transformed your company?
I mentioned earlier, it transformed our company because it took DR from a cost-based, painful discussion to a strategy discussion. It allows our VPs to say, we can do DR and we can prove cloud possibilities at the same time. It's a great POC for long-term roadmaps.
What about you, Jamie?
Literally, we've been transformed from an on-prem business to cloud. So we're, in 2 years' time, we'll collapse our final physical footprint and move our 10-year effort to consolidate, push it back out through Azure tenants in 2 years over the world. We couldn't have done that. I wouldn't want to do that without a tool like Zerto. If I had to do that with the tools inherent to Azure, I'd rather quit.
So you had mentioned one thing, Jamie, that I found very interesting a while back about your storage future.
Yeah, so we have no more storage. So probably I'll put it up on eBay and garner some funds for a Christmas party. We literally have been told you have no more capital. Don't ask us. You will not get it. Go OpEx. No more hardware for you.
That's pretty, what a change in just a few years from the on-premises data center mindset to, we're not buying any more storage.
Yeah. Well, we didn't even foresee it. When we purchased Zerto, that wasn't an option.
So do you think that the business would have still had that directive had you not had a Zerto and the success you've had with it to the public cloud?
They may have had the directive, but they wouldn't have had the timetable on that directive, knowing that we have a means of evacuating this, enabled the higher-ups to say, you've got 2 years. I know it's technically possible. I've seen the tool.
Okay, very good. Let's open it up to the audience. Any questions there in the back?
So in the Americas, the stuff that we maintain, it's relatively small. It's only around 250 VMs. So we consolidate down to save on CALs and paying Microsoft for SQL. That's the biggest driver.
Do you feel if your environment was much larger, say 2,500, 3,000 VMs, would you be in a different situation?
I would be going Azure. That would be from what I've seen, what I've experienced with Zerto, I wouldn't be going AWS. Simply because until tomorrow, we'll see what happens because of the RTO not being.
From an on-prem versus public cloud.
No, that directive came down about 3 years ago from our CIO, who flies the world over and came over. And we have meetings where groups come together, and it was called To the Cloud and Beyond. He gave out Buzz Lightyear figurines and said the directive is net new in the cloud. I don't care what cloud at that point in time. Peak 10's cloud, AWS, Azure was not available yet. So we were directed regardless. So we also have we have another data center in Enschede in Holland. They have a larger footprint than us. Asia, we have to handle cooperatively together. So they're spread around the globe, not nearly the size of what Andy's dealing with in one location, but the complexity is still the same.
Okay. More questions? Over here.
Maybe a question to you. Once you move the VMs to Azure, what's your any DR thoughts, specifically when you move to SQL as a service, as you mentioned? What are you going to do? Do you care about DR once you're Azure, and how do you plan to achieve it?
Yes, after moving to O365, the realization hits you that Microsoft guarantees availability, not recoverability. So the first lesson learned was, well, I need to recover data from my mailbox that I deleted leading up. I'm going to get to what you said was Microsoft O365 handing the Exchange off to them does not give me a tool to recover mailbox data to a point in time. So we spun up an EC2 instance and bought a product. Now we back up Office 365 from O365 to S3 and AWS. So when we move into AWS, or Azure, I'm sorry, what we'll do in the immediate is replicate back to that hardware on-prem, start to disassemble those application stacks consuming paths, and by that time, I'm hoping that Zerto will support replicating services out of Azure somehow, someplace.
You heard that, don't you, Slim?
I'm looking.
I mean, for those unfamiliar, it's development.
That is my hope. If not, it's going to be handed off to the DBAs. It's going to be handed off to the people who are responsible for that particular piece of the application stack to figure something out. Do they have to buy a product, and do we have to spin up an instance in Azure and AWS to accomplish that? Maybe.
Andy, tagging on to Jamie's point of availability, are you consuming any sort services, you know, that are available in AWS, and have you ran into the, hey, we'll say it's available, but maybe not protected?
We are consuming EC2 instances in order to run the Zerto Cloud appliance, and S3 in order to store the Zerto journals. We're not using cloud native AWS platform as a service type stuff yet.
Okay. So now that is a transformation step, though. Is that in your, do you see that in a future sort of roadmap of maybe you'll start consuming a database as a service or things of that nature?
Probably, yes.
As you get, is it the stepping into it, get comfortable, then start consuming more, as
Yes.
you see? So I'm just curious.
I'll tell you, an excellent resource to start playing with AWS is the Amazon Storage Gateway. It's a virtual appliance you can deploy. If you have space on your SAN and you want to mess with it, download, run the Amazon Storage Gateway. You can present it as a DFS share to end users and host data in Oregon that they believe is on their PC on the L drive right there where they are. Another great use for it, where we didn't have shared storage, is we bought Synology NASs, $1,200 NAS, installed the storage gateway to the NAS, sent it to Canada, and now we use that as a target for Veeam. So Veeam targets an Amazon storage gateway running on Synology, which gets replicated to S3 in Oregon.
Wow.
And that's something you can't, if you just do it as we also use it as an endpoint for backups out of Zerto.
Yeah.
So we use the Zerto offsite backup target, Amazon storage gateway. It gets replicated offsite to Oregon. That's something you can play with. They quit charging $125 just to have it. And if you're doing it as a backup target and you don't like it, turn it off and delete it and move on.
So basically the world's now your data center, right?
Exactly.
You just move things around. Got one more question and then we'll wrap up.
So I know one of the guys here because I worked with him, but but I'd love for the group to hear how your experience of once you made the decision to go to the cloud, what are some of the, I know you gave some warnings, but what are some of the things, and how long did it take you to get your environment stable so you could execute your full testing? And number two, what are some tips and tricks that they need to do as they're scaling out their cloud operations to ensure that VR testing goes well and is effective by the time you need to launch it?
You want to start?
Going by what Andy said, check the stats, or what the limitations of the cloud provider you're using. On both sides, usually there's soft limitations, like Andy said. You send a email to their support giving them a legitimate reason that I need more, and they'll accommodate. I mean, they're not going to give you 1,200, obviously, because it's public cloud. So read up on the limitations, and those limitations are the same ones that Zerto have to live by. So when you go to fell over that 32 VM VPG, realize it's not the same as moving over my metro to my physical. One good trick to use in either public cloud is until 5.5 coming out here shortly if you want to get out, but you want to go up there and play. Do a failover, test failover into the cloud, right-click, snapshot that test failover instance, tuck it away, stop your failover test. Once you have your test network in the cloud that's isolated, turn them back on. So you've got a copy using Zerto's failover function. You snapshot it with Amazon or with Azure's snapshotting function, connect it to your test network, turn it on, and play. You can use that to tests, use that to jot your notes down, move your notes to an S3 bucket, dump them back on your live production, so the next time you replicate it back out, there's all your notes in your failover environment from the box that you put on-prem, all those notes on-prem from. Those are some of the things that, some of the tricks, I guess we can say, that we've used. Getting the environment stable took 10 years, still working on it. The majority of the things that we ran into were self-induced. We didn't do a good job reading the limitations of the cloud provider. Called Zerto and they said, well, you idiot, you're trying to spell over 32 that says you can't do that. And I thought, oh, okay. So it was a lack of research on our own part for stuff like that. But just know there are limitations.
And Andy?
Test frequently, obviously. One of the things with AWS is that the disk layout of a Linux or a Windows machine can affect your ability to import. So if I go back as an admin and I add disk and I expand the OS drive, I may not be able to import it depending on my disk layout. So test frequently. Also put in, once you realize those things, put in audit checks to go back and check your environment.
Very good.
Other than that, it's pretty stable. Yes, sir.
Just one quick question. Did any of the bean counters develop sticker shock?
Sticker shock on the bean counters. I'll say that our OpEx model was not accurate the first time. we overshot our projected budget. That's why it's 20% rather than the 30% I told the VPs it would be. Oops.
That's a good way to put it. There's an explosion of consumption of resources. It skyrockets. You go from exploration mode of what can I do, what's the possibilities, into fiscal responsibility mode, reserve instances. How can I stop this thing at least from going up? How can I plateau it? Didn't get in contact with a rep. You actually have a rep. If you have an AWS or an Azure footprint, you have a rep that they'll tell you. Again, because they want you to spend money elsewhere. You can save money on an EC2 instance or a virtual machine instance by getting reserved. And these are the types of reserved instances you can get for this reason and that reason. So ask the vendors, ask the people, you know, our own community right here, what are you doing? How did you save money? So it's an excellent question. Yes, there was sticker shock. Again, because of exploring the possibilities of what can I do. Then once you see that graph going up, you learn how to become more fiscally responsible while balancing the exploration. So self-restraint, again, is my problem.
It's like VM sprawl, only
Yeah,
in
what else can I do?
yeah. All right, Andy and Jamie, thank you very much, and thanks everyone for attending, and hopefully this is informational. Thanks.